The whole Moorish American identity began in the 1920s. So we'll give you a little background. There were several, I'm not going to call them cults, I'll call them sects of African American religious and cultural liberation. Remember, this is 1920s during the Great Nadir was in place. You had folks being lynched, and Jim Crow was in full effect across the country, where it wasn't law, it was tradition, de jure, where it was a place where de facto or de jure, where Black Americans were just looking to find ways to unify, work together, right, and do their best to fight back against Jim Crow, de facto and de jure, tradition and law. So you out of places up north, you had the coming of a couple of different sects. We'll be kind today. And one of those sects was this whole notion of being Moorish American. And it really is a sect that it's only appealed to a very tiny percentage of my community in Chicago, Detroit, Houston, LA, New York, Newark, and these places, DC, Philly, Baltimore. It's never been anything big or broad, okay, including in Atlanta. It's really a very tiny sect, and many Black folks have never even heard of it. There's some information on YouTube about it. There are a couple of Moorish leaders that have YouTube. All these things, and I've had many Moorish friends over the years and taught the students. They call themselves the Moors. They're Moorish Americans, and it's a very small, almost insignificant number of African Americans, okay? Very small sect. It was in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, probably maybe a little bit larger today, but that's not saying much, okay? If they broach 2% of the 46 million African Americans, it'd be a big deal. I would even give them the 2%. So it's a very small number of us who are involved, and usually those Black Americans that are involved are in an urban area. Okay, they're in an urban area. And the Moors have done some good things. I can't totally, negate their existence. They've been around about a century, and they've done some good things for the people, and here and there, helped the community, and I give them kudos for that. But yes, they're never going to unite with anybody now, okay? They see themselves as a separate kind of African American, citizen, if you will. And they're not going to, unite with anybody, man. They're doing their own thing. They have been since the middle of the 1920s, and it's probably going to be that way, for many, many years to come. To offer you a little bit of historical background, okay? But there's a lot of information about the Moors and what they believe is their so-called, quote-unquote, history, their past. It's all a bunch of nonsense, in my honest opinion. Can't be proved. It's all conjecture, and they've kind of piecemealed a bunch of other folks' stories together to make their story. Just my opinion on it. I've never seen anyone offer any real evidence about their past. And, they wear those red caps, those red hats on their heads, and you can find many a European collaborator, West Africa, wearing those red felt caps. So, they've kind of made up a past to justify who they are, in the 1920s and now today. You'll find a few hundred in Harlem, a few hundred in Philly, and they have centers. Well, my mom grew up in Harlem. To offer you a little bit of historical background, red hats on their heads, and you can find many a European collaborator, West Africa, wearing those red felt caps. So, they've kind of made up a past to justify who they are, in the 1920s and now today. You'll find a few hundred in Harlem, a few hundred in Philly, and they have centers. Well, my mom grew up in Harlem, New York. St. Nicholas Housing Projects on 31st Street, 7th Avenue. There was a little clique of Moors not far. So, I would go and spend weekends with my mom's sisters, my 6 aunties, and 4 uncles who all lived adjacent to St. Nick, Grant Housing Projects, and these places. So the Moors were there. So as children, my cousins and I, they would, ask us questions, who are you? You say you're an African American, a Black American. They would say, no, you're a Moor. And they would try to pass information So there is some black pride, African pride in them. I'll give them credit for that. But there are also other Moors who do not see themselves as African. Their first and only identity, culturally, socially, is that of a Moor, of a Moor. And so, it is what it is. I've stopped arguing with folks these days. You get older, you don't want to keep arguing and, yelling and going back and forth with folks that you believe that you are this Moor, and that's fine. And Mauritania is your home, and Morocco is your home. Well, that's fine. 9 and 10 of them will never go, never go spend any time in Mauritania or Morocco. So people kind of make up a past to try to justify their existence. Like I said, it's like a Frankenstein. You sew on a hand, sew on a leg, sew on the neck, the head and the neck to the body, sew the body together with different parts. But God bless them. But now the only thing about the Moors I will mock and make fun of very often, they will they'll drive and have no driver's license from a given state. Let's say in New York, you're driving every day, you ain't got no New York State driver's license or one from any other state. And the police will stop them, and I think there are some videos on YouTube here and there. They'll assert their Moorish nationality, and there's something called the nationality claim. A nationality claim. It really became big in the late 1950s, early 1960s. The nationality claim, because you have this paperwork that you printed up in your basement that says you're a Moorish American. The American law can't really bind you. You don't need a driver's license. You can travel without a passport. There's a bunch of foolishness, right? A bunch of foolishness. The cop will stop you and ask you, and you show them your little papers that you printed up, and they'll take those papers, hand them back to you, ask you to step out of the car and take you downtown. Okay, but they have not learned in 50, 60 years. So that whole notion, there are folks, even white folks, who now believe in that nationality question. Can I become a Moor if I'm a European person, a white person? And if I assert my Moorish identity, does that mean I don't have to have a passport to travel? I don't need a driver's license, social security card. There were many, many white folks and Hispanics were into that Moorish nonsense from Boston down to about D.C. So just give you a little background. It's really a very, very tiny percentage. Most black Americans couldn't tell you two things about the Moors or being a Moorish American. And if you leave the Eastern Seaboard, it really gets quiet. Now you have little outposts, like I said, Houston, here Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, but anything in between, y'all, it's virtually almost unknown. It's like literally unknown. The Moorish American flag and Moorish American identity.